We've been lucky enough to follow Dark Point Games Achilles Legend Untold from its early access build on PC to its initial console release. From its starting point as an isometric Souls-like ARPG, it evolved into a more streamlined and balanced action RPG that mixes elements from Souls-likes and the reigning behemoth of ARPGs, Diablo, into its own little thing. Now we're taking a look at the Switch port of the game and asking ourselves, has it made the jump to Nintendo's aging hybrid handheld intact? If you're not familiar with Achilles Legend Untold, then let's get you up to speed with the basic premise. Legends Untold drops you into the blood-soaked sandals of that mythical warrior Achilles during the siege of Troy. When an encounter with Paris cuts his legend short, Achilles awakens years later in a Greece that he no longer recognizes. Cruel soldiers, brigands, mythical monsters, and an even crueler king have reduced the land to a nightmare. Seeking to find out what's happened to him, Achilles begins the legendary quest to rival the Odyssey. Now, it would be easy to compare Legends Untold with Titan Quest or Diablo because they contain similar gameplay mechanics and that traditional isometric view, but Dark Point Games has developed a more straightforward ARPG that isn't purely about mob management and loot drops, though gear plays an important role later in the game. Instead, Legends Untold is more of a straightforward hack-and-slash experience, whose difficulty settings will determine your playstyle, whether that be a more tactical approach, faster and more frenzied, or all about kiting enemies from a distance. Some remnants of its initial Souls-like ambition still abound, mainly in the light and heavy attack system, dodge rolls and save shrines to activate and spend skill points at. However, beyond that, the streamlined combat, gear and skill system gel with a heavier focus on story and side quests, which give the game its own feel. That I didn't have to struggle with massive mobs, repetitive loot grinds, or a punishing difficulty on the default settings is the icing on an already wonderfully fun game. And that is exactly what Achilles Legend Untold is. Just a lot of fun, even if its story and side quests ultimately boil down to kill and fetch quests. What it may lack in narrative surprises is made up for by exciting minute-to-minute gameplay, and a world that won't block you from exploring when you want to. And while the world is big and interconnected via tunnels and corridors, it never feels unmanageable or arduous to trek across. Your skill tree is similarly constrained, featuring several constellations that unlock new moves or stats, from more health to stamina and damage. That limited scope keeps your roving eye moving forward towards skills that actually matter to your playstyle, such as a parry-focused constellation if that's more your speed. There's also a nice and steady flow to gaining new weapons if you explore thoroughly, with standard swords and spears, to axes and shields, all with different material tiers and elemental enchantments. And finally, there's the question of performance on the Nintendo Switch, a concerning one considering that Achilles Legends Untold is an Unreal Engine-powered game. Like most UE-powered games running on or ported over to the Switch, cutbacks have been made to get the game running decently. Luckily, these cutbacks have not been as heavy as they are on most UE-powered games. But there's no denying that geometry detail, texture resolutions, character models, and overall environmental complexity and prop density has been stripped back. The advantage to these cuts is that performance remains mostly smooth, with the only drops in frame rate I noticed occurring when some larger enemies were on screen. And for a game like this, you want a smooth frame rate for the action-based dodging and counter-attacks. Even with these visual cuts, I still think Achilles Legends Untold looks pretty good on the Switch in handheld mode, though if I had to be picky, I'd say the on-screen characters are a little too small to read easily. One visual nitpick I do want to highlight is how environmental objects can obscure the characters. The camera angle, coupled with the scenery that doesn't fade out or disappear, leaves you with plenty of blind spots in which you can't see either Achilles or the many enemies roaming the world. This is most noticeable when traversing paths between rising cliffs, or in the game's forest where foreground trees obscure the action. Minor gripes aside, Achilles Legends Untold remains a fun isometric ARPG that's a nice break from the usual RNG loot and season grinding of most games that dominate the genre. It's also nice to dip into Greek mythology with a fun, responsive combat system that gives you a nice amount of freedom on how you want to play. Barring some slowdown, the fact it also looks and runs pretty well on the Switch is a bonus. It makes this version of the game just as easy to recommend as I would on any other gaming platform.
If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow.